I am fairly certain we are in for a treat heading into week number 5 because not only do we have some games that involve high octane offenses facing opposing teams that can actually put some points on the board, making game stacking pretty fun, but Brandon and I have already argued off air once for today about the viability of a tight end who shall not be named. He has now been redacted, similar to Joshua Kelly. So probably going to be a pretty fun show for today. We're going to break down the week 5 NFL DFS main slate, break down game stacks, break down injuries, key trends to know, and our top plays at each position over on FanDuel.com. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, joined here as always by Brandon Gdula. He is a senior managing editor for FanDuel Research. Brandon, I will welcome you into the show despite the fact you have already been wrong once today. How you doing?
Well, I was going to say I learned my lesson from last week where I just say that I'm good and move past it,
But you're not good.
Just move past it.
Because I've already tilted you into oblivion, correct?
Well, I made a joke about how bad tight end is on Slack, and you agreed with me, and I mentioned a game that I liked, and then I mentioned, and you agreed with that, and then I mentioned a tight end who, as we are wont to do, when we don't really know what to do at tight end, we throw in some tight ends from games that we think are good. This just set you off.
He's talking about Zach Ertz.
And then
I want you all to know he's doing this for Zach Ertz, who is 67 years old.
And then you did a gym, and you're like, he's had this many yards. That's the most yards he can ever get.
Correct.
I don't know where this has come from you.
What is more likely, that Zach Ertz's production increases as he is 57 years old, coming off a torn ACL in a fine offense, or that his target share decreases a bit as time goes along? What's more likely?
What's more likely this week in a game that we like, whenever tight end is really difficult?
We can use tight ends in games we like who aren't, I'm trying not to swear, who are not doggy do. Like Sam Laporta is in a decent game. We like Sam Laporta. His salary 6,000. Dallas Goedert's in a pretty good game. He hasn't done a whole lot this year, but he's better than Zach Ertz is. I can tell you that. There are tight ends in better games than that one. Like, that game is fine, but there are tight ends in better games who are not 109 years old, who I can realistically see getting me 60 yards. So I don't want to do it. I'm not gonna, so quit asking.
I mean, you're mentioning guys at much higher salaries.
6,000.
You're pretending
500 is $400 more. It's not that much higher.
You're pretending like Dallas Goedert comes without.
You've been muted. I've muted Brandon. Anyway, this is the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. That's right here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. I unmuted you. Don't worry. It was temporary. I want to be like the Tony Reale over here. So you've been muted. It just take you a little time out. We are here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed twice weekly, every Monday and Thursday. Monday, the recap podcast. Thursday, the preview podcast. And of course, Austin Swaim has UFC DFS for you as well when they have cards. To get all those as they're posted, make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. You can also find these NFL shows on the FanDuel YouTube page and on FanDuel TV Plus. To check out FanDuel TV Plus, go to FanDuel.com/watch and log in with your FanDuel account, or download the FanDuel TV Plus app on Amazon Fire, Apple TV, or Roku devices. Also, a reminder, we have a weekly free play over at FanDuel Research for all of you listeners to celebrate the transition from numberFire over to FanDuel Research. Go to FanDuel.com/research, and the post with the free play link should be on the homepage there. FanDuel.com/research to get involved with the free play. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, totals, and more. So visit FanDuel.com and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. First online real money wager only. $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Tennessee, and Virginia. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777, or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700. Visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Let's dig in now to our slate overview here for week number 5 in the NFL. And Brandon, to me, I think this slate revolves around game stacks because we actually have really high level game stacks for this week, specifically talking Chiefs, Vikings, talking Rams, Eagles, and potentially some others that could be intriguing as well. So for me, it's kind of a back to the basics kind of slate where we get to actually load up on good teams and good spots where we can actually feel good about the opposing side. What is the key to the week 5 slate for you?
Yeah, game stacks. I think that there are non-obvious game stacks. You were talking about the Texans game. We're going to talk in detail about the Bengals offense. I think those are games that can be fun. So sometimes you play players in games like
Play
that.
Marquise Brown, play James Conner. I don't care. Play someone else, anyone else.
And especially for an offense that's not good and has played 2 really tough defenses in a row, and then gets a much easier matchup. Maybe that's good for a tight end of some sort.
I mean, the Bengals defense is fine. Like,
fine. It's not as good as the past 2 they've played. And
what did Zach Ertz do against the Giants and Commanders? He totaled 77 yards in 2 games. Dust.
All right.
Dust.
I gotta make sure that people know that I'm not like locked into Zach Ertz, but I think he's viable at his salary, and Jim is just getting extremely upset about it. So I just need to make that clear. But no, I think there's game stacks, and sort of the irony about all of this is we have a lot of overlap in our player picks because I think there are a few, like a lot, might be the most ever. Because I think there are a handful of, I don't want to say obvious plays, but our process has become very similar over the years. And I will say Jim has gotten a little more along my lines in certain ways over the past couple weeks, which is nice to see. But along with that, there are studs on the slate. Travis Kelce can alter the slate. We have receivers, quarterbacks, running backs, maybe. But it's a week where like you got to get access to those guys, and so those second tier, if you just lump all the good games as like the good games, and like what's the second kind of place you look, those games for value stacks, that stuff's really going to help. So I think we're again on the same page, which is great because of how the show started.
Correct. We are aligned despite all the evidence that says
despite one of us being slightly okay with playing Zach Ertz because tight end's bad.
Just pick anybody else. Like anybody else. Let's go to the injury section for week number 5. And weirdly, a lot of positive injury news this week. So that's refreshing. Jonathan Taylor back at practice for the Colts, listed as a full participant in practice on Wednesday. He missed the first 4 games, but seems like he's fully healthy right now. Colts face the Titans, a very tough rush defense this week. Taylor's salary, $7,400. Is that low enough to entice you in a weird spot where he's coming off of injury?
I don't know how much work he's going to get. This is one of the worst matchups imaginable. I don't like to kind of write things off like this, but the way that I kind of see this going is that he's going to get like a moderate workload. The yardage isn't going to be amazing because it's a tough matchup, but he's going to like score twice, and it's going to be like he was good, not great. And if people try to jump on at this salary, like I get it, but there's a lot of unknowns with this, and I don't think that this is such a low salary in this spot that I'm like, this is people like to throw around like free space or like lock, that kind of stuff. I don't think it's that even at this salary.
And like he could go for those 2 touchdowns, but like I think that's also true of guys in situations where they're like median and 60th percentile expectations are higher. So like Joe Mixon's below him in salary, right above him you have DeAndre Swift and Kyron Williams. I like all those guys more. So I'm okay missing out on JT if he does do well this week. Cooper Kupp returned to practice on Wednesday for the Rams. Missed the first 4 games with a hamstring injury. Kyron Williams though missed practice for what Sean McVay called precautionary reasons. We'll talk about the Rams in the bookmaker section. Saquon Barkley limited in practice Wednesday. He practiced last week too, but ultimately did not play due to his ankle injury. Barkley's salary is $8,800. He is a big underdog against the Dolphins. Is Barkley in your consideration set if he does play?
He should be, because I want access to Miami in some form or fashion. He's got to be the only Giant we can really consider on a slate, even though it's a 10-game slate and you knock, an extra 4 teams off of a slate. That matters. I don't know if it's enough for me to be considering non-Barkley Giants. As for Barkley, to have access to someone with a ceiling like his, you have to allocate salary.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like there's no room for error, and I don't know how many touchdowns they're going to score.
And like, will he be effective coming off a high ankle sprain? Yeah. I think all that stuff is kind of the consideration set here.
Yeah. So like, I think the most logical way that I'm going to have exposure to Saquon is whenever I play Jalen Waddle, because his salary is a bit low and you just kind of cancel each other out.
Yeah. We'll talk about the other Giants later on, but I think there are better ways to get exposure to. They're in the bookmaker section. I think there are better ways to get exposure to that offense, which we'll talk about later. I don't know if I'll use them either, but I'm not going to get to Saquon, I don't think. Jameson Williams is back, had his suspension shortened, so he's eligible to return this week. Amon-Ra St. Brown did not practice due to an abdomen injury, though he played the full game in week 4. We'll talk about the Lions in the trend section. Jeff Wilson eligible to come off IR, but he did not practice Wednesday. That likely means he will not be back this week. That boosts expectations for Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert. Mostert didn't practice Wednesday, but it was due to rest, so no concern there. We'll talk about the Dolphins in the bookmaker section. Jets head coach Robert Saleh said that Breece Hall no longer on a pitch count. He has played 31 and 26 snaps the past 2 games, though effectiveness has been spotty. The Jets get a very leaky Broncos defense this week. Any interest in Breece Hall at $6,500?
Pretty amazing rushing yards over expectation numbers. Are you talking like effectiveness just in terms of total production?
Success rate.
Okay.
Because he's had a bunch of long runs, but he's had not much outside of that.
But we know that that's sort of what he...
Yeah, and like I'm fine with that. Like Kenneth Walker's the same way, and I can use Kenneth Walker at times. Like it's not a negative, but like he has been very, home run or strikeout. Just to bring in your favorite sport here.
Yeah, I love tennis. The salary's great. Denver's allowing 1.95 rushing yards over expectation per carry. That is easily a league high. I think Breeze makes a lot of sense. There's another name just above him in the salary pool that I think we prefer.
Isaiah Pacheco,
but I could see both being in play for those lineups where you just say, we talk about this a lot at like tight end, but if you're okay avoiding Derrick Henry to a degree, you think Saquon's a little oversalaried, Montgomery's like at his limit. I don't want to talk bad about Bijan, but like there are only a handful of like true grand slam hitters, to stick with the tennis metaphor.
There you go.
So I think that you have ways that like you could build probably a Pacheco, Breece Hall lineup, and we'll talk about flexing wide receivers. But I think that there are some guys in that mid-6 range salary, and Breece Hall is one of them for me for sure.
Breece Hall or James Conner, both at 65.
Now, what is it like? Why are you okay with James Conner all of a sudden?
He's been productive. Like he hasn't looked as dusty as Zach Ertz has.
Okay. I kind of like both. I've been like all right with Connor most weeks. Not last week, of course, but uh, I Brees Hall clearly has a much higher ceiling.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting Brees Hall at his sort of low end because the salary's down because he's been on a snap count. Now that's getting lifted. It's a good matchup. I think Connor's ceiling is about what he's shown us. So I'd go with Hall, but Connor's in play as well. So again, another name in that range who's very playable.
I also think we overlooked the most important part here, which is that it is a Brees Hall revenge game because this is the stadium where he tore his ACL last year. So
is that revenge?
Yes, against the field.
Okay.
We saw Geno have revenge against MetLife on Monday, so why can't Brees Hall have revenge against I don't remember, Allegiant? I don't remember the name of the Broncos stadium anymore. But anyway, I was there. I just don't remember what it's called. But I think that the Brees Hall revenge narrative is in play. I also think he was pretty viable before this endorsement from Saleh. That endorsement means his roster will be higher, which I hope takes away from Pacheco, but I still think Hall is in play. I'm definitely interested in him for sure this week. Javonte Williams has practiced Wednesday with a quad injury. The Broncos also elevated Dwayne Washington from the practice squad, so that does not bode well for Williams' availability. Jaleel McLaughlin's salary is $5,700. He's going to lose work to Samaje Perine because Perine is a very good pass blocker, but are you willing to take a swipe here at McLaughlin at $5,700 if Williams doesn't go?
What is the what is the viability of Perine?
Perine?
Yeah.
No.
Why? Because he's old and dusty.
Yes.
Even those roles. All right, higher snap rate. Perine.
Well, but that's because they were down 40 points.
Who will have a higher snap rate this week?
I think it'll probably be Perine, but like it doesn't matter.
Who will have more adjusted opportunities?
Probably McLaughlin.
Okay, I think it's fairly close. For that reason, if I have two options in an offense I don't love, probably a little bit low.
Gotta be the Dolphins to have two be viable.
Yeah. That I don't know. It's like I say this often, but if you're in season long and need one of these guys, like that's one thing. But to go out of your way to target them in DFS, I have these numbers, but although I don't think I have Javonte out, so this wouldn't be super accurate. But like to you, what are the odds that either of those guys get you like 18?
Pretty low because I think they'll split. And it's the Jets are a pretty tough defense. So I think, and also like McLaughlin has played well last week, but like we've seen with Marvin Mims, that doesn't matter for this coaching staff. Yeah. So I'm okay being lower on McLaughlin, even if Williams does not go. T. Higgins didn't practice Wednesday due to his broken rib. He's day to day, and it sounds like he has a shot to play because T. Higgins is much tougher than me, but definitely up in the air. We'll talk about the Bengals in the trend section. Odell Beckham and Rashad Bateman both returned to practice for the Ravens Wednesday. Both those guys sat in week 4. Despite this, the total has come down a half point. Why? I don't know. I like the over here. But how does that alter your view of Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, and Zay Flowers against these Steelers?
So we talked, I guess last week about Lamar and Mark Andrews in a tough matchup being like, look, if you're going to get them where people are a little bit low, they make sense. This has me elevated on Lamar from where I was, but I still don't love this game. I think this is going to be just not a great game overall. I know we're going to follow this one up with some news on the Steelers, but we're talking like non-obvious game stacks. I don't quite think this is one of those. And if you want to, there's basically one route to stacking it, and it would be Lamar. I would say Mark Andrews and just avoid the pass catching, like the wide receiver headache, and then George Pickens and just hope for the best.
Yeah. I like the over here, but my model has it at 41.9, so that's still pretty low.
Yeah.
Like that is third lowest on the main slate. So even though I like the over, it's not enough for me to like be leaping. Like I like Tua more than Lamar, even though Tua isn't like a very positive script. I like Anthony Richardson more than Lamar, so I'm okay not getting there. Kenny Pickett got an limited practice Wednesday with his knee injury. Pat Fryermuth didn't practice. He's likely to sit. Fryermuth, sorry. Darnell Washington ran just 9 routes with Fryermuth leaving early Sunday, so probably can't get there. Does this alter your interest in George Pickens at all, though?
I'm kind of eyeing him up, but I don't really know if I need to get there. I can play receivers at similar salaries in games I like a lot more. So,
Yeah, I think his target share has exceeded my expectations because I always thought that because he doesn't separate, he would not command a big target share, but he has without Deontay Johnson. So I think he's like fine at 65, but like I like Michael Pittman again at 66. He's gonna get back on my poop list real fast though. I like Michael Pittman at 66. Jalen Waddle 68. Like, would you rather tie your pass catcher to Tua or to Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky? I think Marquise Brown is also better than George Pickens because he's not dusty in a game I like more. Let's dig in now to the bookmaker info for week number 5, beginning off with the highest total on the main slate. That is in Minneapolis for the Vikings and the Chiefs. Total is 52.5. The Chiefs favored in this game by just 4 points. Now it was 5.5. Or is it 4.5? Yeah, it's 4 right now. So total has come down, but the spread is tightening, which we'll definitely take. We have studs here on both sides, blended with some value plays. So I'm just going to ask you, any downsides, any negatives to stacking this one up for you?
I think the only negatives might be when you try to get to the others in this game, because these are the types of games where we see the non-obvious plays pop up, but these two teams in particular have a pretty wide array of guys you would consider others. The Chiefs are just basically that team where it's like, we like Mahomes, Kelsey, and now Pacheco, I think, is sort of elevating from that. All of the receivers, though, really easy to get wrong. And even if you get them right, there's not necessarily a lot of production tied to that. Obviously, for Minnesota, it's Justin Jefferson. I'll be all right with Kirk Cousins in potentially high scoring matchups just because I believe that he can go for 350 and 4 in matchups like this. But it's like the Jordan Addisons. I don't want to just put TJ Hawkinson in that bucket, but
Speaking of Zach Ertz.
So yes, this is such an awesome game, but how do you get access to it with confidence is the key here. Unless you're just building every permutation or combination. I never know. I've failed all my math classes. Of this game. What do you do?
Yeah. So like you said, the high usage guys come with high salaries, but I do think that there are ways you can kind of offset that at least a bit. Rashee Rice hasn't had a big workload so far, but it has been increasing slowly. And I think what's encouraging with Rashee Rice is that even though he hasn't played a ton of snaps, he still has 5 targets in 3 out of 4 games. He's looked like the best, receiver on this team. So I think that if you want to get to a Mahomes Kelsey stack, which obviously I would like to, you kind of want to lump in another lower salary guy in this game, like potentially Rashee Rice. You can lop in Jordan Addison too, 59. That gets you 68.28 left per player with a $3,800 defense in there. I think that's pretty doable given the running backs on this slate. So I think I can make it work. It does require some bending, but I'm okay with making that effort because I'm getting a lot of upside as compensation for taking a shot at someone.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You can be okay with it, but do you want to be just okay with your lineups? You could get this game could score 90 points, right?
Yeah.
And you could still get 12 points from everyone who's not Kelsey,
sure,
Jefferson, and Mahomes and Cousins, basically.
Yeah. And I think that's scary. That's scary for sure. And there are lineups that will make me feel better, specifically from the Rams Eagles game. Lineups I build there, I'll feel better about. I guarantee you that. But we also know that the edge you get in using Kelsey is pretty substantial. If I use Kelsey, I'd probably want to use Mahomes too. So,
Yeah.
I think it's worth feeling uncomfortable to get there. But let's talk about those side pieces. That's a weird way. Let's not call it that. Let's talk about the non-obvious pieces here, because I'm just going to speak for you. We love Justin Jefferson. We love Travis Kelce, et cetera, et cetera. The non-obvious pieces here to me, Isaiah Pacheco, Jordan Addison, and I would put Rashee Rice in that consideration set as well. I don't really want to get to the Vikings backs, but talk to me about Pacheco, Addison, and then I guess if you're willing to use Rice as a value play here.
So Pacheco coming off of about a 64% snap rate, career high. Had he broken 50% in a game?
He had gotten to 57% in the AFC Championship game last year, and then 56% in one regular season game last year, I believe.
So we still got to keep expectations in check, because this is not a 80-90% snap rate. But he looks so good when he runs, because he just runs like it's the last football carry that will
talk about a revenge game against the turf. I feel like that's just always what he has. Like the turf wronged him in some way.
It's just like, okay, this is the last carry we're ever going to get in American football. Got to make it count. Like, I don't know, but he's getting targets. He's involved in terms of routes. I know he scored the past 2 games, but that hasn't actually inflated his salary. One trend I tend to do every season is like looking at who's been scoring and what that sort of does to their salary and expectations for the next week. But the salary is still very reasonable here. So he's my favorite play outside of the 3 most obvious guys, like the 3 true superstars in this game.
And Pacheco is viable for you beyond game stacks, correct?
Yeah, I think, cool. Yeah, for sure.
What about Addison?
I think I still got to sell myself on him. He's running behind KJ Osborne in terms of routes. I know that you can't just look at routes and snaps and say like, this is who's in the pecking order, because it comes down to who's getting usage or more leverage. I do think that it's a little bit, if I'm just taking a step back, like I want to be excited about Jordan Addison, but if I'm taking a step back, I feel like, am I just overlooking the fact that, KJ Osborne's there and it's a pretty similar workload, and like I shouldn't just lock on to Addison? What are your thoughts on Addison versus Osborne?
That Addison, if we assume this game gets pass heavy, he's probably going to play a lot, because last week his snapper was down because the Vikings were terrified of Kirk Cousins, A, and B, they had a lead. So they were able to go with fewer 3 receiver sets. I don't think that'll be viable this week. I think they'll know. Kevin O'Connell's a smart guy. I think he'll know he needs to put up a lot of points in this game. So I think the Addison snap rate will increase, and like he's getting downfield work. We talk about how the threshold at receiver is 85 yards or 2 touchdowns. 85 yards for him, fully within the range of outcomes. And I could say with a good amount of confidence. So I think with Addison, very okay. I think he pairs really, really well with Pacheco. Like if I want to go with like a Jalen Hurts lineup in that Rams game, I think that having access to this game via Pacheco and Addison is pretty enticing. And I think that Addison is like, he's like kind of viable beyond game stacks. Like I think he's primarily a game stacks guy, but like if I need a value play and I've got too much Tank Dell at 6,000, I'm fine going to Addison at 59 as like a way to keep my Tank Dell exposure in check.
Yeah, and this is where it gets a little tricky with workloads, especially for rookies or players, working their way into bigger workloads. Like, yes, he's running behind Osborne, but even with that, if you give proper weight to like downfield targets, red zone targets, like he's got a better role. So it's kind of strange.
Yeah,
Osborne, I know you're not going to love the yardage upside. I don't think that he's out of consideration.
No, 54 is low enough where like you could give it some thought.
Yeah, I mean, if we're considering, we're really not, but like if we're considering coin flip running backs on the Broncos offense, like, right, we're going to talk about who like flex plays and running backs versus receivers. I mean, give me like Addison over McLaughlin.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
yeah, for sure.
So,
yeah, I agree with that. And then any Rashee Rice for you or no?
Maybe.
Yeah.
The Chiefs are so difficult because it feels like there should be when Mahomes can throw for 450 yards and it's just to 12 different guys
Mm-hmm.
and 200 of it goes to Kelsey and then it's just the rest goes around to everybody else. So
Yeah.
it's really tricky to go into a slate knowing you can play anyone and play and you know choose even at low salaries choose guys who have somewhat cap ceilings.
Yeah. Like I think he's flimsy. Um, and I want to be transparent in that, but
Is he game stacks only in the hopes that it's a shootout?
yeah, because
Okay.
if it's not a game stack, I'm gonna prefer Robert Woods at $5,000. Calm down. Like I'll get there eventually. I know.
I just love how you pick and choose stuff. Certain players not having the yardage yet, and you're like, well, there's a path to it, but certain players don't have it. It's because they're bad.
I
I
mean,
just love it.
one is the best quarterback in football throwing in the
I, lo-
ball. That's
I just
Robert
love
Woods.
like I was trying to say who's gonna have more snaps between the Broncos running backs. You jumped down my throat because you thought I was just talking about who had more snaps last week. It just it's just one of those shows. But we need that because we're gonna have so much
Agreement later on.
agreement in the player
Yeah.
picks. So got to get out of the way now.
Yeah. Any final thoughts for you on this game?
I would honestly just say be careful. Like a lot of those plays are gonna feel like sure plug them in, and then unless you kind of build a skeleton where it's like Mahomes, Jefferson, Kelsey, and then you just kind of flip in the values, and I'm here for that.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm gonna experiment. I think you can do it. I had a Mahomes, Kelsey, Rice, Jefferson lineup, and like that can work. It will not feel fun, but I think it's worth digging into for sure.
so quickly then, which of the like ancillary guys are you considering at
Pacheco
all?
doesn't count, correct?
Right. So
Addison.
Rice, Addison.
Addison 1, Rice 2, and then nothing else.
So just the okay.
Yeah.
No, all right.
Are you going to go to any like Osborne? I assume for you. I don't think that's out of play. I just don't think I'll do it myself.
I mean, he's more likely, I think, than any of the Chiefs guys beside
Yes.
Rice. So.
Agreed. Okay. Very similar setup here for the Rams and Eagles in Los Angeles, where the total is 50.5. Eagles favored by 4.5. I feel like this game feels similar to the Rams Chiefs game or the Vikings Chiefs game, except with lower salaries. Anything giving you pause with this one?
Not pause necessarily. I talked last week. I did a trend on the Eagles offense because eventually they're gonna have like one of them games.
Mm-hmm.
It could be this week, and I want to get there. I don't think we're getting a lot of discount. AJ Brown's salary is 82. Although I would maybe say that Jalen Hurts at 86 is a little bit of a discount from what it could have been. Uh, Devontae Smith 75. He went from scoring in each of his first two games to having 28 and 78 yards. He still has a ceiling, obviously. It's just a little bit shaky. DeAndre Swift versus Kyron Williams, I think, is interesting. If you can pick just one, maybe a route to go here is stacking the running backs, which I don't think people do enough, but that's
I agree.
a pretty positive correlation play from the stuff that we've researched. So, and two tight ends you could consider and maybe not love necessarily, like to a high degree. A lot of ways to go, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to start a quarterback. Let's talk about Jalen Hurts because I think that Hurts is my favorite quarterback on this slate above Mahomes. His salary is $8,600, and Hurts has not had like a nuclear game yet because the rushing outside of like the tush push stuff has not really been there. And I don't think it will be. I think they're kind of making a concerted effort for him not to be as active on the ground, but like the rushing touchdown expectation is very high. He's been throwing the ball a pretty decent amount so far, and we know where the ball is going. So I think Hurts is my favorite quarterback on this slate. How do you compare him to Mahomes on your end?
Yeah, I actually prefer Hurts. Easier to stack too. There's only
Mhm.
so many places the ball is going to go. He's got obviously just as someone who tries to like simulate stuff and model things out, just a true outlier in terms of his touchdown rate. But the thing that I kind of talked about last week leading in was like he hasn't had that 30, 40 point game The passing touchdowns haven't been there, which is kind of a thing whenever you just run for them. But
Yeah.
good amount of carries. The Rams have given up some rushing to quarterbacks over expectation. Those are always small samples this early, but I think he's a much safer play than Mahomes, who does run, but not as much as you might necessarily want. It's a little more sporadic, and if that game doesn't stay close, he's not really going to run a whole lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'd prefer him straight up, and he's a little lower salary. It's also Mahomes because that game is great, but
Right.
I think that's where I am. Pass catchers for him, AJ Brown, as you mentioned, probably could have had a higher salary than 82, given what he did. If you look at the overall numbers this year, Brown has a 36% target share. For a guy at 82 and a great game, it's very point chasey to go with him. But like also, he is objectively under salary based on that workload. Devontae Smith, 24% target share. Dallas Goedert, 16%. Deep targets are 50% for Brown, 32% for Smith, and Goddard has just 2 so far this year. And then AJ Brown, 4 red zone targets 2 weeks ago, 42% red zone share. So like, I don't prefer AJ Brown over Justin Jefferson, but again, I think to me, it kind of backs up that this game is just a lower salaried version of that Vikings Chiefs game, which I think is very attractive.
And it also gives you more routes, though.
Yeah.
You have 2 receivers, like two solid pass catchers, maybe 2.5. I'd probably say 2 though.
Is Goddard the half? You mean on the Eagles side?
Yeah. Who are the 2 for you?
No, I was clarifying. Yeah, just clarifying.
Okay. But Brown and Smith, 82% of the team's air yards. They get a lot of leverage. AJ Brown much more so. I think DeAndre Swift is very playable.
Well, talking about the running backs, because I think both those guys are like legitimately good compared to the slate. Kyron Williams didn't practice on Wednesday. It's a hip injury. It sounds like he'll be good to go, at least according to Sean McVay. I tend to trust McVay when it comes to that kind of stuff. I think he's decently forthright compared to a lot of other coaches. And I would also say that I think that DeAndre Swift, his workload last week was the most impressive workload I've seen from him so far because it came post Kenneth Gainwell return. It was better than what it was in Gainwell's first game back. So I think both Williams and Swift are viable beyond game stacks, but I kind of agree with you where I don't mind pairing them together just because, like, if this game goes nuts, both those guys probably going to get some work towards the goal line. I know Swift less likely to do so, whereas Kyron Williams' red zone share is like 16,000%. But like, I think both these guys definitely do grade out pretty well.
Yeah, a lot of different ways to go. Who do you prefer? You prefer Williams
Kyron.
straight up?
Yeah, the goal line work is really, really good and tough to pass up.
And important. Yeah.
Yes.
That's so one of the things that
I can't get past him, but I think that both are good.
Yeah, so Williams, great play so long as he's full by Friday. So talk to me about the Rams pass catchers then.
Yeah, so Cooper Kupp probably going to be back this week. Sounds like he's pushing to play, and his salary is $8,500. I can't get there in his first game back with a hamstring injury. He's not full yet, so I think that's a concern. I think it does downgrade Puka Nacua. I don't think it makes Nacua out of play though, because Nacua is playing the Robert Woods role where he's getting some like rush attempts. He's not playing inside the slot, which means that Kupp's return won't impact his playing time. I think that Van Jefferson's probably going to get pushed out, maybe Tutu Atwell, but not Nacua. He's been too good for that. And so, like, if you gave me a healthy enough Matthew Stafford with Robert Woods at $8,000, I would not say no to that if it were a game I wanted to stack. So I think Nacua is still in play. I'm not as into him as I was before, obviously, but I wouldn't cross him off still. What are your thoughts on him specifically?
Game stacks only.
Mm-hmm.
It's a differentiation play.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's going to be as popular. I don't think he's going to get very popular because Kupp's back, the salary's up. I had to scroll for Atwell's salary. 58.
Yeah. I think that's where there's a potential. Like, I know he's had a lot of targets, but like, I'm a little bit worried about a loss of playing time more so with him than with I know he hasn't played a ton in the slot. That's again primarily Van Jefferson, but like still a bit worried they might slide Jefferson outside. Jefferson hasn't played well, so like I don't know if he deserves playing time, but like that's at least possible for him.
Yeah. I'm probably not going to get there.
Yeah, I agree.
It's really it's really easy to sell yourself on, again, those lower end pieces of games that we love, but doesn't always work out and is not always the best process. So
I think the value plays in Chiefs Vikings are better than the value plays here, but I like this game a little bit more once you consider the salaries of the studs.
The salaries and the amount of studs. Like,
yeah. So I think it could be a slate where you get your Jalen Hurts, your AJ Brown. I'm going to go with Dallas Goedert as well, and then run it back with Kyron, and then you add in the value plays from Chiefs Vikings. I'm just going to build
Checo
and Addison for me. Like that's really doable. I think that's very doable for this week. So maybe that's like my favorite build. I think it actually is my favorite build. Like studs in this game, value plays from Vikings Chiefs.
I don't hate it.
Okay.
And matchup between last year's WrestleMania host and this year's WrestleMania host in this game, I just realized.
What do you mean the host?
So it was at SoFi Stadium
last
year, and now it's going to be
the cities.
Yeah. Sorry.
I was like, did Matthew Stafford host WrestleMania like at his house or something? Like
he might. I mean, George Kittle will be there, but
tight ends. Dallas Goedert 55, Tyler Higbee 53. I still think Goddard is probably due for some positive regression, and I will probably have a ton of him this week. Higbee, I'm worried about the target share with Kupp being back. I think that it was encouraging. He played well through that injury. I think it was an Achilles injury last week. So that was encouraging, but just worried about the target share collapsing on him. Thoughts on Goddard and Higbee?
They're fine. That's all I got.
Any differentiation for you between the two, or are they in the same tier?
I'd rather go Goddard, but
okay. I agree.
That's all I got.
Okay, let's finish up here with our third bookmaker game. That is the highest implied total on the board, which belongs to the Dolphins. 30-point implied total for a matchup with the Giants. Total is it 48.5 now, 29.5 point total for the Dolphins. Dolphins favored by 10.5 here against the Giants. We should try to avoid that big of a spread, but the Dolphins are sick despite a down game last week where they had 398 yards still a good game. Just had some weird turnovers. Jeff Wilson might be back, but looks like he's probably not going to. So how are you viewing the Dolphins here if we assume there's no Jeff Wilson? And are you willing to run it back with any Giants?
I think you'd have to talk me into any Giants other than Saquon. And I think Saquon's probably not necessarily someone that I really want to get access to. Best play here at salary has to be Jalen Waddle, even as a favorite. Salary is really good at 6,800. If you look just at the results, like, sure, it kind of makes sense, but hasn't scored yet. Hasn't necessarily been unleashed fully. Has had some tough matchups. So like, there's a chance that he only finishes with like 5 or 6 targets, but those could lead to 2 touchdowns based on the efficiency. So he's I would say easily the best play in this game at salary. The Dolphins running backs are getting up there for me, but still have interest. What are your thoughts on this one overall?
Yeah, I love Waddle at 68. I think that's a great call. I could not agree more with you. Like situations in which like we're okay. Well, like if you want a lower salaried receiver, I think you want them in spots where you expect the quarterback to be efficient. And that's what we expect from Tua in this game. Like if it's not going to be a shootout, I want them to be efficient, and they will be that in this game. And Waddle, despite not having done it this year, still been fine. 78 yards, 86, 46. Like that's fine for a guy in the 6,000 range with no touchdowns. So I think Waddle's awesome. And I agree that he's the best play in this game. I'm higher on Achane than you are, I think, because when I was doing Name That Salary on Monday, I was assuming that Jeff Wilson would be back. And I said 75 for Achane then. And now it's 75 with Wilson potentially not back. That's really fun, honestly. Now, the concern that I have is that I think if they get way ahead, it'll be a Mostert kind of situation, probably skewing towards Mostert, skewing towards Von Ahmed. But if they get way ahead, I think that there's a good chance that Achane is involved in getting them there. So I think I'm a bit higher on Achane than you, but I fully agree with you that Jalen Waddle's a fantastic play.
I'm just sensitive to the fact that he's scored 6 touchdowns in the past 2 games. He is very good at football. That is clear. But he could have, he played what? How many snaps?
Played a lot of snaps this past week.
38 snaps, 66% snap rate. Love the 5 targets, obviously. That's worth a lot. That's basically worth 10 carries. But had just 8 rush attempts. Would I be astonished if this team wins by 14, 17 points? He has 12 carries, 5 targets, doesn't score, has like 100 some yards, and it's fine. Like, I would not be shocked by that, and that's not necessarily enough. I think that's a little bit too likely to want to go in on him as a primary play. But if I can bring it back, then I'd be more inclined to play Etienne.
So he's only game stacks for you?
Not only, but he's a little close to that because I just can't envision like a blowout scenario.
Yeah.
Well, I can envision a blowout scenario where he is great, but
yeah, I mean, we saw it 2 weeks ago.
So
they hung 70. He scored 6 times, basically. Yeah, I think I definitely like Kyron more. I think he's in the same tier as Swift for me. I prefer Swift by a smidge, but I think Achane's in that tier for me. It's not like he's below the Swift tier for you.
This will sound weird, but I think I prefer Achane straight up.
Okay.
But I might
because you like the other game more?
Well, I might prefer Achane because he doesn't have quite the scoring concerns.
Yeah, that's fair.
Necessarily, but I might end up having more Swift because I'll probably stack that game. So like,
I think that's fair.
It's a tough one. Achane or Jonathan Taylor?
Oh, Achane by a mile.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like Achane, I would say is in the Mixon tier for me, where it's like, yeah, I'll probably get there. I like Mixon a decent amount this week, so I think that he's kind of there for me. As far as the Giants go, I'm not going to get to Saquon. I can guarantee that the salary's too high for an offense this bad. I think if I were to consider anybody here, like maybe you consider Darren Waller at 61 as kind of a buy low spot. I really don't want to personally, but I think you could consider that. And then it is worth noting, I'm not going to act on this, but like Wan'Dale Robinson did play a lot of snaps this past week, much better than he was before. I'm not sure if he can get you 85 yards or 2 touchdowns. And then Jalen Hyatt also did see his snap rate increase. He's $4,800. I don't think I'll get there either, but both those guys' roles did improve this past week for what that's worth.
Sure. I feel like if I mentioned Darren Waller in passing, you would have yelled at me, but
no, because he's not Zach Ertz.
Okay.
Like he's a wide receiver. Zach Ertz is basically a tackle who occasionally gets targets.
Well, if your quarterback doesn't have more than 1.1 second in the pocket, I don't know how much it matters, but
yeah, still. All right, let's go now to our trends discussion for week number 5. We're going to start things off by talking about the flex position on FanDuel, because this is not something I thought about. I've just kind of used running back without thinking for a very long time. So you're going to talk me through the data and what that says about the flex position on FanDuel.
Yeah, it's a really complex question, but I got a question on Twitter, which I happened to see. So if you send me a question on Twitter, I probably won't see them, but I did see this one. It was just about like, should we always use running back in the flex or receiver? And basically the person who tweeted at me sort of mentioned that if you look at like the top 25 lineups in tournaments or something, it's about half running backs, half receivers. So wanted to talk about it, but boy, it's not easy because a lot of it still comes back down to your expectations, the specific type of lineup you're building. And it's also even hard to pinpoint like what success is from like a process standpoint. Because if you look at top scoring lineups, like, the top 25 in the Sunday Million or something, or perfect lineups, it's compiled by outliers or compiled with outliers. And that's different than how to maximize like your projectable probability to have success. So here's what I got. Since 2018, to 2022, half of the flex players in perfect lineups, so the absolute best lineup you could have made on the main slate, 50% of the flexes were running backs. 41% were receivers, 9% were tight ends. It's been skewing more toward receivers in recent seasons. So from the first 3 years in that sample, the running backs made up 55% of the flex position in perfect lineups. Since 2021, it's been 44% running backs, 46% wide receivers, and 10% for tight ends. So more receivers in the flex slightly. So what does that mean? Like, okay, well, let's start using the flex spot to utilize these receivers. Maybe, but the thing that you have to narrow down, and this is what's really hard, is the consideration set for receivers. And I thought about this because I knew I was talking about this. Like George Pickens, is he in consideration this week? Sure. Are the Broncos running backs in consideration? Not quite, but probably for some people. So like, how do you define that? There's really not a great way, but if you look at like historical Sunday Million lineups and look at how many players at each position have been on at least 5% of lineups, where it's basically like, okay, people were sort of there. It's about 7 for quarterback and tight end, 14 for running back, and 21 for wide receiver, which means there's sort of more obvious wide receivers. Now, you have to roster more receivers by default, so like that's part of it. But I don't think anybody could sit here and say like, no, it's way harder to find running backs than it is to narrow down receivers. I think that's a little bit of a sort of gaslighting argument there. Even if you reduce it, which I'm sure Jim was probably ready to do anyway, but if you reduce it to like players on 1% of lineups, it's about this, like it's the same sort of setup. It's like 15 quarterbacks and tight ends. I think that's fair. Like you'd knock off the bottom of the quarterback pool, and like sure, people can talk themselves into a lot of quarterbacks. 25 running backs, 40 receivers. So like again, you can't really argue that there are more wide receivers that you would consider playing in a given week compared to running backs. Now, if you look at this year, there have been 2 running backs and 2 receivers. And this speaks to like, this is why it's tricky to kind of narrow this down. In week 1, the flex was Tyler Algier. And if I just determine the flex is like the lower salaried play who would have fit that, he was on 0.6% of lineups. He scored, I think, twice. Had a game that he hasn't really replicated since. Salary again, $5,400. Week 2 is Puka Nacua at a salary of $5,800. He was under salaried, but rostered only 5% of the Sunday Million lineups, which was interesting. Week 3 was Etienne at a salary of $5,000 on 0.4% of lineups. Again, not a whole lot of consideration there. Week 4, Michael Wilson, big game out of nowhere, 0.2% rostered. So, like, I wanted to talk about the actual rates, but also something to keep in mind is the consideration set. So historically, we've been very pro running back in the flex. I still largely am, but it's easier now with the lack of featured backs to find like salary to flex a running back who's in a good spot, because the good spots are like they're not 90% snap rates. They're like who's got like a 70% snap rate. So I'm ultimately going to lean toward running backs in the flex until I find it hard to do so in a given week, or if I just like love a particular set of receivers or particular game stack. So the long-term math says it's about the same, but whenever you factor in like the amount of backs and receivers you would consider, that skews toward it's still better to play running backs there, unless you're willing to brace a lot of volatility for receivers. So it's probably going to be the most complex trend that I do all season, but I think it's an important one because it'll dictate a lot about how we move forward with our process. So what are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, I think first I want to say the person who asked you the question, like that was a good process to come up with that. Like looking at I know it's hard with FanDuel not having CSVs for tournaments, so sorry. But like that's the right process to see what process has been successful for others. So kudos to you on doing it that way, first of all. but because it kind of accounts for the like, was this person viable question that you had. So I think that was smart to look at it that way. I think the way I've changed is beginning last year, I was more receptive to receiver in the flex in weeks where running back was bad. And that'll be the case again this year at some point. I think for week 5 specifically, I kind of am okay with running back in a lot of different ranges. Like Bijan Robinson, 82, I adore. Kyron Williams, 78. Joe Mixon, 7,000. Isaiah Pacheco, 66. DeAndre Swift. A good number of guys I think are viable. And I kind of just ask myself, okay, in this salary range, do I like the receivers more or the running backs more? And for this week, you're comparing Bijan Robinson to AJ Brown. That's not an easy question to answer. So I think that this week you could justify receiver in the flex, but because I like enough running backs and because it's easier to predict the upside at running back, I think personally, I'm going to skew that way. But like if you said I've got 82 left in the flex and I can go AJ Brown or Bijan Robinson, I'll say follow your heart. There's no wrong answer there. If it's like Isaiah Pacheco against Michael Pittman, then I'll probably lean Pacheco. But like for the stud receivers, I think the stud receivers this week are better than the stud running backs outside of Bijan. So it's at least a discussion, whereas in the past it really was not to me.
I think this is honestly a pretty good week for this conversation too, because there are high salaried running backs to consider.
Yeah.
Derrick Henry is not like we got to play Derrick Henry at 9,000. So therefore, like,
right,
we got to save some salary elsewhere. Therefore, it's really hard to get back up to an AJ Brown in the flex, for example. Saquon's role is not, what it has been in the past. Like, I love David Montgomery just fine, but the salary is way up there. But we're talking Isaiah Pacheco, 6,600, like coming off of a 65% snap rate. He's like a core play level for us this week. Right. Whereas before it would be like, I would like to flex Isaiah Pacheco. This week we have Breece Hall, who I think is undersalaried, coming off of his snap count. And I think the best example of how things have shifted since we started this podcast is we're considering James Conner at a salary of 6,500, whereas in the past, like, we would not have, because
it'd have to be an injury thing to get a starting running back at 65.
Because Derrick Henry would have been playing 80% of the snaps and having all of the carries. Saquon would, have the best workload in football. So like stuff like we don't have that.
Yeah.
So running backs are still, easy-ish to predict. And we have like a big consideration set, but not nearly as big as with wide receiver.
Yeah, in a positive way. Okay, let's move to my first trend then and talk about ways to find some salary savers, maybe, because we got a lot of studs in good spots and we need to save salary somewhere. We can't use Hurts, AJ Brown, Jefferson, Kelsey, et cetera, all in the same lineup without saving salary somewhere. And I kind of don't hate the Texans as an outlet for that. So I want to look at their offense so far this year and see what we should expect from them in week number 5. They're facing the Falcons this week. The total is low. Texans are underdogs here, but I took the over in the Texans money line earlier this week. That has since moved against me because I'm a moron, but regardless, I did it. Across the first 4 weeks, the Texans rank 3rd in adjusting passing net expected points per dropback. Again, NEP is numberFire's EPA metric. That's while playing without their top left tackle for 3 games, without the backup left tackle in there for another against TJ Watt, and CJ Stroud still shredded. And they get a nice boost for the schedule they face. I said they rank 3rd after adjusting for schedule, so I don't want to double count that, but they're up in 3rd because they faced the defenses ranked 3rd against the pass, 9th, 10th, and 13th. The Falcons have been good this year defensively, but a lot of that is their rush defense and a lot of the schedule they face. They rank 23rd against the pass once you adjust for their schedule. The Falcons 6th against the rush, which should funnel work towards passing game. Texans tried to run the football a lot in week 4 and were a bit more successful, but still generally pretty bad rushing offense. So we should see a lot of passes and they should be efficient, which allows me to consider the passing game here. Now, CJ Stroud's salary is 72. He has hit 20 FanDuel points 3 times, including a game where he threw for 384. 20 FanDuel points does nothing for me at 72, but 384 yards, that's pretty intriguing. He nearly had a rushing touchdown in week number 4, twice, actually. He had one where he was down at the half-yard line, one where he sneaked it in, but then snuck it in. But it was called back via penalty. Not a big runner, but it's something he can do. So I don't know for sure if I'll get to Stroud, but I made a lineup with Stroud in it, and oh, buddy, did it look fun. I'm considering it. Pass catchers, pretty easy click here because their salaries are low. Across 3 games with Tank Dell starting, both Nico Collins and Robert Woods have a 21% target share. Nico, 28% of the deep work, with Woods at 33%. Woods also has a 36% red zone share. Tank Dell, 20% overall, 22% deep. 7% red zone share, but he did have a red zone rush attempt this past week. Tank Dell's salary, 6,000. Robert Woods, 5,000. Nico, 7,000. I don't want to use Robert Woods, but he's getting high leverage work from a very good quarterback, and his salary is 5,000. It's worth considering. Plus, we have a very obvious bring back here with Bijan Robinson. He is undersalaried, I think, at 82. The Texans struggle to stop the rush, so I think it's a really intriguing game. So talk me out of it, Brandon. Am I dumb for wanting to use the Texans on a slate filled with very good offenses and good games?
Well, I think the whole point here is you can't just use the best plays across the lineup. Like, you have to make some concessions. And while there's generally, like, our process is going to lead us toward like value plays from good games, this isn't necessarily like a terrible game or anything. And over the past 3 weeks, those 3 receivers have 20+% target shares. We kind of pick on the Colts historically for like never getting anyone to 20% or above 20%. Nobody's at 30% or anything, but it's still concentrated, but it's all kind of accounted for with the salaries. My favorite play of the 3 is Dell for sure. Best combination of salary and a little more, I think, a little more juice, even though Woods has had a better weighted target share because he's got a better red zone role. But it's kind of crazy that all 3 are viable. I don't know if I'll quite get to Nico Collins because of the salary coming off of a 2 touchdown game, but I do see the case for just kind of getting in on all 3 of them to some degree.
I think the one counterpoint to Nico about the touchdown thing is the yardage has been there too. So he's not dependent on touchdowns. 168 yards last week, 34, 146 and 80. Like, for a guy at 7,000, that's sick. So I think I'm okay with Nico at 7,000.
I just always like to see the 168 no touchdowns.
Yeah.
And then buy in, but that's all.
Yeah, especially with his red zone share not being great. Robert Woods hasn't scored yet, I don't think. I really don't want to do that, but like, he's worth considering, which pains me to say.
What's his max yardage potential? Is it just 74 because that's all he's had so far?
I mean, 74 is better than 56, but anyway, no, because he's actually getting deep targets. Like, he's getting deep. He has the building blocks for upside. I don't know if he'll actually like convert on that.
How many lineups would you need to build to get Robert Woods in there?
15.
That's it?
10, 15, somewhere in there. Yeah.
I need way more than that.
Well, because I'm probably going to have Justin Jefferson in a lot of those.
Yeah.
So.
The potential that he gets you like 6 FanDuel points is too high for me to get there after like 10 lineups.
I mean, he's 5,000. So that's the trade-off you have to make to get to the things we do for Justin Jefferson.
Oh, man. If only Zach Ertz's salary was $100.
Well, it's a Jefferson Kelsey thing, and I'm not flexing Zach Ertz because absolutely not.
Yeah. In that trend, don't flex tight ends. I should have mentioned that.
Yeah, that's smart. Okay, let's talk about the Lions because they're awesome. My boy, Jared Goff, finally getting the kudos he deserves. But they're facing the Panthers this week, and the Lions are 10.5-point favorites. 10-point favorites. It was 8.5 earlier on this week, but because the Lions are good, they keep getting bet down. I actually had them as 11-point favorites this week, I think. So talking about the Lions, what we should expect from them as big favorites here.
Yes, this one's tricky. Big favorites, implied team totals 27.25 now. There are basically four elevated implied team totals on the board. The Dolphins, the Chiefs, the Eagles. We talked about all of them already in the bookmaker section specifically because their games are largely good. But then there's the Lions before we get a drop off. And so you got to kind of take a look, right? Whenever there's a team that should be scoring points, but is also favored. You've talked, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, about the importance of close spreads, but this is not that. So I wanted to look at what they're doing with the expectation that they might lead, because they've been quite run heavy. Their pass rate over expectation, which is, it takes into account score, down and distance, all that kind of stuff. And it just, calculates what your pass rate, or how likely you are to pass. And then if you run it, it's all adjusted there. So it's all contextual. But their pass rate over expectation is minus 7.4% this year. It's the second lowest in the NFL. When they're ahead by 8 or more, it's minus 5.6, which, is slightly more pass heavy, but it is what it is. And in the second half with a lead like that, they've had 59 plays. They're at a minus 8.4%. Now, Panthers offense, not very good. 29th in adjusted net expected points per play. So if they can't keep this one close, I don't think it will really surprise anyone. Carolina's not great defensively either, and they're 32nd against the rush according to numberFire's adjusted metrics. Don't love that. If you're hoping for passing volume, really, really just not good numbers across the board if you get even more granular against the run. But this team could just run the ball and win. David Montgomery then is the first place to kind of look. His salary is really high at $8,500, coming off of a great game. Jahmyr Gibbs' salary is down to $5,900 after he played a 38% snap rate in week 4 with Montgomery back. Montgomery, though, quadrupled Gibbs in rushes, 32-8. He had 12 red zone carries. Gibbs had 1. I always love Amon-Ra St. Brown, but this week's probably not the best week for that. Jameson Williams in the mix. We should want access to a team with a 27.25 point implied team total. I just don't know what to do. What are your thoughts on your guys, Jared Goff and the boys?
Yeah, I agree. We kind of want some pushback for them. And I'm not sure they'll get that this week, just based on the way the Panthers have played so far. I think that Sam Laporta is 100% in play. $6,000 for him. He's had yardage upside. My previous process at tight end outside before I was just like, oh, time to like good games, was to hoard high imply team totals. And the Lions have that because it increases touchdown expectations. So I think that works for Laporta as well. The target shares are there. I don't think Jameson Williams will be a huge threat for targets right away. Seems like he's been sequestered in the doghouse. So, I think that Laporta is kind of the one guy I want to go to. I love St. Brown. I think he's objectively under salary, but I don't want to take advantage of that this week because he's banged up, might not need him as much. I think there's enough here where really is about Laporta for me. With Montgomery, are you willing to use him over Bijan, or is Bijan definitively the guy for you in the 8,000 range?
Bijan is the better play.
Yeah.
But his workload's been really good.
Yeah.
And they seem a little hesitant to run Jahmyr Gibbs out there a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Austin Eckler, maybe on he does fantasy shows. I think he just sort of said that he looks like a rookie out there, which I will trust because he would know better than I would.
Also, he's basically Jahmyr Gibbs' best form is being Austin Eckler. So yeah.
So, you want to say well, they'll get Gibbs more run because this game won't be close. But when they were ahead last week, it was the day.
Also, Montgomery's playing well. So
he is.
Why change why fix it if it ain't broke?
It's almost like situation and offense matters for running backs.
Weird, right?
So
crazy. Yeah.
I don't think Montgomery's out of play, but for me, Robinson is. If I built 10 lineups and I was playing one of them in each or something, I had to, it's probably 8-2 in Bijan's favor.
8-2 is the floor. I might go high. I might go 10, honestly, but that's not because I dislike Montgomery. I just think that Bijan, Like he's the kind of running back I want to use. Even on FanDuel, I know people discount half PPR, but like pass catching still matters a lot, and Montgomery probably won't do that.
What do you think Montgomery's sort of stat line looks like in terms of carries and like yards?
It's
Because I know touchdowns are hard to predict, but
with like 20 plus carries, honestly,
it's
which
like
is absurd.
I don't want to like gloss over him and be like, well, he's going to get 20 carry. I'm not saying he's shout out Nick Chubb, like, but
yeah,
the floor is there for carries.
Yeah.
And
it definitely is. I just worry about, I think Bijan's route to his ceiling is more obvious. Yeah. That's what I would say. Okay, let's do our last trend here and talk about the Bengals. They get the Cardinals this week, which is a good matchup. Arizona, the 30th ranked overall defense by numberFire's metrics through 4 weeks. So we should want the Bengals. The question is whether they can take advantage, because they had a great matchup through the air last week. Didn't matter. Face the Titans, who ranked 29th against the pass. And Joe Burrow still turned 30 pass attempts into 165 yards. So no Burrow for me this week. Jamar Chase, 9 targets in that game for 73 yards, but none of the targets were deep because they had to get rid of the ball so fast. That does not mean we cannot use Chase with T. Higgins likely out, but doesn't help his case. Tyler Boyd, 7 targets there, 19% target share for the season, playing alongside T. Higgins. Just 1 deep target so far. He has just 1 in the red zone too. So I'm open to Boyd at 63, but I do want to keep enthusiasm in check there because he's probably not going to get a lot of high leverage stuff. I think the guy we may want to dig into most is Joe Mixon, because the Bengals so far have faced the rush defenses ranked 1st, 4th, 13th, and 16th by numberFire's metrics, whereas the Cardinals are 21st. Mixon is at 14.8 carries and 3.3 targets per game. And the targets could increase if with T. Higgins potentially being out. And I think the efficiency should go up in a softer matchup. Mixon's salary is $7,000. I think if I want to buy low on the Bengals, Mixon is my preferred route for doing so. So what's your interest level in the Bengals offense in a good matchup with the Cardinals?
I like them. I like this game. Like this game, relative to what expectations should be for the game. I'll clarify there. I think Joe Burrow's in play. He said he's starting to feel a little bit better, but that he's sort of limited with sort of the in-pocket mobility. He's obviously not a rusher as it is, but very good matchup against a team that has not generated. They're 29th in pressure rate, just not good against the pass overall. They're a little bit scrappy, so it is what it is. But I think that you could do worse than Burrow. I looked last year; there were like 3 games where T. Higgins was limited. Jamar Chase had a 36.1% target share in those. We look for ways to get access to high ceiling players whenever it's not super obvious. I don't think that Jamar Chase, whenever we have Justin Jefferson in this game, like Jamar Chase is going to get a little bit overlooked. Even if you don't love Joe Burrow, but like Jamar Chase and Marquise Brown is a really fun mini stack. So I love Chase. I like Burrow. Love Mixon. Don't know if I'll stretch it past that for the Bengals, but I do think there are ways to bring this back. And that includes James Conner, which, is, again, it's a different landscape at running back than it was in 2018, whenever this week we would have to be playing Derrick Henry no matter what.
CJ Stroud or Joe Burrow?
Burrow, because he's easier to stack.
Just like in a vacuum between the two of them. Not considering stacks. Like, who do you think will score more FanDuel points this week?
Well, like median wise, it's very close. Ceiling wise, I would say Burrow has the higher ceiling.
You want to do a bet?
Sure.
Okay. I'll take CJ Stroud. You'll take Joe Burrow.
This is a fun one for once.
Yeah, it makes me kind of sad because I like Burrow a lot, but I like Stroud a lot too. So
are you just assuming that Burrow doesn't quite have it right yet?
I think there will be 0 rushing, and Stroud, it's not 0. And like the passing has been efficient as well.
When have we ever played Joe Burrow for the rushing though?
I know, but like it's less when it's like, oh, actually 0. Because like he's kind of feisty. Like, he's got some, like he can run when he needs to, just not right now. So I don't know. I don't think Burrow's totally out of play, so I get what you're doing. But I like Stroud more personally.
I know that the Titans aren't good against the pass overall, but they can generate some pressure.
That's very true. That's that's the best counterpoint you could have. I agree.
So
that's very fair. It's a different matchup in shape in that way. So that's very, very fair. I agree with that as well. So yeah, I think he's fine, but I prefer Stroud personally for the lower salary guys. Mixon or Pacheco? Mixon 7,000, Pacheco 66.
Should be Mixon, but I'll probably have more Pacheco due to the savings there.
Yeah, and the game. Like both games are fine, but Pacheco's game is better.
I guess I can't quite. Well, I guess maybe I could do that.
I think the best answer is Porque no los dos.
Well, sure. I was gonna
in there, but
I was gonna say Stroud, Tank Dell, and Bijan, or Burrow, Chase, and either Connor or Marquise Brown.
The Chase aspect makes it tough,
right?
Because he's really fun.
He's gonna get them targets.
Yeah. There was a video with him after the game against the Titans game. He's like, I'm always bleeping open. Sorry for cussing or something like that. So certified dog, and you gotta love that. So it's tough. You're skewing me a bit more towards this game, which is good. Okay. Weather for this week, only 2 games with high winds are games we don't want to touch. That is the Steelers and the Ravens at 12 miles per hour. Patriots and Saints at 11 means I don't have to chase Alvin Kamara. I probably will still anyway because I am a detriment to my own happiness. But he's 71. If Mixon winds up getting all the interest, he could be a pivot. So whatever. Yada, yada, yada. I do think that hurts Chris Olave. Olave is popping a bit in projections for this week at 71 because the salary's low, but like high wins, banged up quarterback, defense is missing key pieces in Christian Gonzalez and Matthew Judon, but I think that does hurt Olave there. So downgrade passing game pieces for the Patriots, Saints, Steelers, and Ravens. Let's go now to our positional plays for week number 5. Brandon, when you look at the player pool on FanDuel.com this week, who stands out to you at quarterback?
We got the same guys. I think Jalen Hurts is the best play of the week at quarterback at a salary of 8,600. Just set up for success. He's been good without being phenomenal. And that's whenever I can buy in because the building blocks are clearly there. We know largely who to stack them with. Preferably A.J. Brown, but also Devontae Smith. You could maybe stack him with DeAndre Swift as well. But Dallas Goedert also in play. The Rams mid-level pass defense based on numberFire's metrics, letting up rushing to quarterbacks that they faced. It's not. He's going to score 30 plus soon. This is a good game for that. Second level is going to be Anthony Richardson at a salary of 8,300. Got that. All the rate. I don't know how many years ago this was at this point, but the pass funnel. Everyone was citing pass funnel, myself included. So I'm not going to say I was not in on that, but great rush defense, not a great pass defense. Can generate pressure though. We still want Richardson against weak overall rush defenses. Like that's not lost on me. But if you adjust his EPA per drop back for opponents faced, he's above expectation. 44 rushing yards per game, second most in the NFL. So I guess you can follow up on those 2 guys if there are any extra notes, but maybe we rattle off who else we like because I think we have basically the same running backs as well. Yeah,
Hurts is my favorite quarterback. As you said as well. No more than 26 FanDuel points yet, but like the building blocks are there. The rushing attempts are there, and the rushing touchdowns could be there, even if the yardage isn't going to be there right now, which I think that will stick. Probably not a ton of rushing yardage there, but he has an opponent on the opposing side who can keep pace, a bring back option in Kyren Williams, maybe Puka Nacua as well. So I think he checks every box. I had Richardson too. I would say that Tua is in play at 8,000 because like our concern with quarterbacks who are heavily favored is passing volume. And if we're going to have a guy who doesn't run, we need 350 yards and 4 touchdowns. Tua might be able to get there on 25 attempts
Yeah.
against this defense.
It's like a classic Russell Wilson game.
It is. Yeah, weird. Yeah, for different reasons. But yeah, that's very much viable. And I will say that I am still open to considering CJ Stroud at 72 just because he opens up a lot. I don't think we've seen his ceiling yet based on the matchups they've had. It's a pretty good matchup here. I think the Falcons will be able to run the ball pretty effectively, which does drain clock. But I think it's at least intriguing. That pace is slightly above average for that game as a whole, based on your pace numbers. Shout out to Brandon. Slightly above average. So I'm okay with it. Let's go to running back. What you got there?
Bijan Robinson is the best play, I think, at running back once you account for salary. But, even with it being up there, I think he's going to be the first running back I want to get in. Just a great role, 74% snap rate, 13 carries, 5.5 targets, over 110 scrimmage yards a game. Really good efficiency in terms of yards over expectation per carry. I know we want success rate, but I will never turn down a good yards over expectation per carry number because that just shows breakaway ability. And if, this team's going to not be the most efficient, I want someone who can make efficiency by himself. I think he's just game script proof. So I like him a lot. Second level is going to be Kyron Williams. I know we're talking a lot of mid-range backs as well, but these two stand out, I think, to me, outside of game stacks that I want to get to. 83% snap rate, not the best yardage output, given that snap rate, but he's going to be relied on. I know this team's going to have a bit of a different passing game look, but he's been really involved as a pass catcher. 62% route rate, 5.5 targets. So I think he's sort of not going to get scripted out in any sense. And then my third love, it's Isaiah Pacheco, but I'll swap it to Breece Hall here. Just sort of as the fourth guy, really efficient. And sometimes it's one of those situations where I kind of say things like this a lot, but like 30 minutes after lock, I'm assuming they play at 1:00, right?
No, because
they play. Oh, that's right. They're playing in Denver. It's one of those. There's only 2, 4, 6 1:00 games.
Oh, lovely. The two best games are in the afternoon block too.
Yeah, 4 in the afternoon. Okay, all right.
It's been torturous the past couple weeks to have most of my exposure in the 1 p.m. games and just this is the best my lineup will look all day. It's only downhill from here. That's very upsetting.
Okay, so this will be one maybe at 5 p.m. Eastern where you're like, oh yeah, Breece Hall was at a low salary because he was on a snap count. He's playing a bad defense,
ACL revenge game. Yeah,
all
the important things.
So there's more to it than that a little bit, but frankly, his role is going to get better. He's been playing well. So I'd prefer Pacheco for a little bit of safety, but Breece Hall very much in that consideration for me at 65.
I agree. So you mentioned we have the same three. Those are Bijan Robinson, Kyron Williams, and Isaiah Pacheco. I'm going to talk about Bijan because I don't want to pivot off of him in the upper range, and I adore him. It's a great matchup. The Texans, decent against the pass, especially Jalen Petrie being back now. I know there's no Derek Stingley Jr., which does hurt their pass defense, but does it matter against this passing offense? Probably not. But good matchup for Robinson. He'll get work in any game script, and I think they should be slight underdogs in this game. 5.5 targets per game so far for Robinson with 113 yards from scrimmage. That's like an old school, $9,000 back, that kind of workload. And he's 82. So I think Bijan is fantastic and works well with game stacks with the pass catchers there. I had Kyron here. I'm going to pivot to talk about Joe Mixon because to get some more guys in here. Mixon, again, $7,000 is his salary. He's finally in a good matchup. The workload has been there. It hasn't been the efficiency, and the workload may get better if T. Higgins does not play because it could increase the targets for Mixon. Even from 3.3, which is not terrible relative to his salary. Mixon does get work towards the goal line as well. So I think Mixon 7,000 could be in due for his best game thus far. My favorite play at running back beyond Bijan, after considering salary, is Isaiah Pacheco. Pacheco's salary checks in at $6,600, and he set a new career high in snap rate this past week at 64%. Again, his previous high was in the AFC Championship game, and he always looks good. He had 158 yards in scrimmage in that game, and he has multiple targets in all 4 games so far. We always see Jerick McKinnon come in towards the goal line, and like that can stick in your brain. But Pacheco does still have 35% of the team's red zone carries or targets. He is a tremendous salary saver in a very good game at $6,600. So Isaiah Pacheco, I think that if I'm filling out one lineup, he's probably going to be one of the first guys I put in, and just to get access to a very fun game at a low salary and a guy who does seem to be earning more work because he's just very good at football. Let's move now to wide receiver, Brandon. Who stands out to you there?
I really want to make sure I get enough exposure to Justin Jefferson. It's really easy to not to get there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's going to be popular, but like as I build my own lineups, it's, well, I'll save some salary here and there. But outside of Bijan, like I'm fine with David Montgomery, but outside of Bijan and Kyron, like who I don't feel the need to force into every lineup, I can save salary at running back and potentially quarterback if I'm not going with Mahomes or Hurts. So I want to make sure I'm using that to get to the real game changers. But this is going to be one of the best games for just the season in general. 136 yards per game. He's got a 31% target share, 43% air yard share. He's got 27% of the team's end zone targets. The Chiefs have kind of been decent whenever you adjust for opponents against wide receivers, but I don't particularly care. And I'll also shout out Jordan Addison. I think his role is going to scale up, which is the differentiation that I'm gonna make between him, between he and KJ Osborne. But also other ways to save at receiver as well. Jalen Waddle, 68. If you look just at the box score, salary makes sense. Hasn't done a whole lot. 5, 6, and 5 targets, no touchdowns, but 78 and 86 yards in 2 of those games. Those are strong outputs. We'll take that. Solid ADOT of 10.4 yards. Not a great red zone role right now. That is a little bit of a concern, but it is sort of factored into the salary. My third love is Marquise Brown at 64. I like this game. I like a Marquise Brown, Joe Mixon stack. Very affordable. Makes sense. There's correlation there. But he's been pretty solid, even with not the best quarterback situation. 10, 7, and 10 targets in his past 3 games. The Bengals are allowing the highest ADOT to opposing receivers by more than a full yard this year. I think that's relevant. Brown's ADOT's 11.3 yards, 3 downfield targets per game. So for me, targets that are 10 plus air yards downfield, 42% air yard share. There are going to be some safer plays, but that's not necessarily all I'm looking for. I want that ceiling. I'll take a little volatility whenever it's tied to someone who can just score on his own if he gets the ball in his hands.
And a Joe Mixon, Marquise Brown mini game stack is actually a lower salary than a Bijan Robinson, Tank Dell game stack. So another point in the favor of that game, which is a good game. So yeah, I think that Brown is a good call out there at $6,400. My first level receiver is going to be Jalen Waddle. I know he was your number 2, but just like I want to +1 your Justin Jefferson because he's absurd, and I want to make sure I get him in a lot of lineups. But Waddle, it's a very positive script, but like 68 is too low for a guy who can go for 150 yards. Like that's well within his range of outcomes. It's a great way to get exposure to the Dolphins. I think that Achane is also a fun way to get there at 75, but Waddle, I think, is the best play in that game overall. My second love will be Tank Dell. His salary is $6,000. He's coming off a down game, and there are a lot of things that have become very efficient in daily fantasy where players become better over time. The one thing that people still struggle with is point chasing. And Tank Dell, they're not going to point chase Tank Dell because he didn't do a whole lot this past week, but he nearly scored on a red zone rush attempt. You know how much I love those. It's he's got good target shares overall since he became the starter. Very good matchup here against Atlanta. Gets to remain on the turf despite being on the road. So I want to buy into this Texans offense. He's a great way to do so for a low salary. And if I need to get to Robert Woods, I can, but prefer Tank Dell considering salary at $6,000. My third love is Addison. You gave him a shout out, so I'll give the full rundown here. Didn't do a whole lot last week, so similar to Tank Dell, we wanted the point chasers up in here, but the Vikings barely threw there. They're now back home in a spot where I can guarantee you they're going to have to throw. Across 4 games, only a 13% target share for Addison, but he has 1.5 deep targets per game, which is a pretty good number, which is why he's had 50 plus yards in all but one game. Back at home, indoors, slight dogs. That's usually a good setup for a wide receiver. So I think Addison's in a good bounce back spot. I don't think there's any receivers below Addison other than Robert Woods and Rashee Rice, who I would consider. It does drop off quite a bit after the mid-range of wide receiver. So I think that Addison is pretty fun. Tight end, what you got there?
Look, it's Travis Kelce. Just the projections, the probability that he has a big game are really high, and there are reasons to think that we just haven't seen, full Travis Kelce yet. 24.8% target share in his 3 games, 8.7 per game, 69% route rate, and a catch rate over expectation of -6%. There's room for growth in all of those numbers. So hasn't really had the full workload. Vikings haven't shown, or they haven't faced tough tight ends. And my model has Kelce's odds to get over 15 FanDuel points at 53%. No other tight ends above 25%. There's just a huge gap in terms of bankability and probability. I don't want to say bankability, I guess, because he can still have a down game, but the probability that he has a good game is not even accurately reflected really in his salary. So I just want to shout him out. And as much as Jim's going to yell at me, my second love is just Zach Ertz. I think it's a fun game. Ertz is tied with Kelce in target share among tight ends on the main slate at 24.8%. The yardage isn't there, but it's a solid enough ADOT of 7.3 yards for a tight end. 33% red zone share, 25% of the end zone targets. The Bengals have been really getting. They've just let up a catch rate over expectation of almost 10 points higher than expected to tight ends. This is going to be sort of the last chance for Ertz to convert on his targets. I can do worse than playing someone in a game I like who's getting targets and hoping that the efficiency's there whenever the matchup says it is. So I'm not saying Zach Ertz in 100% of my lineups, but tight end's bad overall, and Ertz is in the consideration set.
I can also use tight ends in games that I like, more than Bengals, Cardinals, and use guys who, or a guy at least who's not a total dust ball because he's a rookie. That's Sam Laporta at $6,000. He's a great way to get access to this Lions offense without worrying as much about some of the other factors. Laporta has 50 plus yards in 3 consecutive games with a 22% overall target share for this team. Now, he could lose some work to Jameson Williams, but I'd expect that to be kind of a slow ramp up for Jameson. So Laporta, I think, is outstanding at 6,000. Other tight end is Dallas Goedert. He's had really weird usage so far, but still 16% target share is not that bad for a tight end with a 25% red zone target share. I think we'll see Goddard get there eventually, and I wouldn't be shocked if it happens in this game because this game is very attractive. So I want to tie tight ends to good games, and this is the second best game on the slate. So I would say Goddard, to me, a very fun option at $5,500, even though we have not seen a lot from him so far this year. Defense, what you looking at there?
We have the same primary one, so I flipped it just so we didn't have overlap here. But I think the Texans are viable at 3,600. Like this offense they're facing is tough. We love Bijan, but other than that, there's not a whole lot there. Texans are 24th in adjusted defense. Falcons offense 24th as well. Desmond Ridder he's allowing sacks like he's handing them out for like their Halloween candy a little bit early in October for that, but 12% sack rate, EPA per dropback of -0.33. The Texans were not good to me a couple weeks ago, and I really needed them, but I'll get back there. But I do prefer your first love.
Yeah, that's the Colts. I actually think both sides of this game are in play for defense, just because the Titans' salary is low at 35. We've seen, although I disagree with the movement, there has been betting movement in favor of the Titans, so that's a positive for them. Even if I do disagree with it, I think the Colts should be favored here. They're $3,800 facing Ryan Tannehill. I think they're going to get Peter Skoronski back this week on the offensive line. Did he play? Yeah, Peter Skoronski back in Indianapolis narrative after he played in the Big Ten championship game in 2020. So there's that. Don't want to overlook that because it's pretty important. I think he was there. Yeah.
It's hilarious because I'm sure that matters
Oh, it
to him
matters.
to some degree. But
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
I'm
This
just
is
gonna
where
change.
I got blown out by Ohio State when I was a true freshman at Northwestern. Yeah, I'm sure he cares deeply.
I'm going to switch gears quickly, but there's a point to it. I was listening to the No Laying Up podcast with Max Homa after the Ryder Cup, and hearing him recount the Ryder Cup just like hours
shot
after,
by shot. Yeah,
and he was like, I don't know if it was like Friday afternoon or Friday morning. Like he couldn't even remember certain details, and I'm like, I think that sometimes we give way too much weight to like people, like athletes remembering stuff.
No, Brees Hall will go for 150 yards because he tore his ACL there last year, and Peter Skoronski will block like heck because of Ohio State beating him. And I guess it was actually kind of a close game, but like beating him back in 2020. I think he'll care deeply. Anyway, Colts defense and Titans defense both very good. I don't mind the Texans either. I think that's actually a good shout out too. Pass defense is pretty good. Rush defense is not great, but if the Texans get a lead, which they very well could, and they force Ritter to throw, or maybe Taylor Heineke to throw, I think that's fun. So 3 defenses that are not bad below 4,000 for this week. Any final thoughts, Brandon, before we close up shop for week number 5?
You can make Justin Jefferson and Travis Kelce stacks work.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to make that clear for myself so that I make sure I get some of those.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of thing I'm like, well, I'm not going to be able to stack them together. It's going to just ruin my life. You can do it. There's some value paths to get that. And I think that's sure, it's obvious. Like, oh yeah, play the 2 best players at their position. But it's not going to be as common as you think because it's hard to do, yet you can do it. So even if they're both popular, the percentage of lineups that they're on together is going to be kind of tight.
Like you do need to scrounge, but you can make it work. 63-28.
That's one of those where you play either Burrow or Stroud.
Yeah.
You go like Pacheco, Brees.
Mm-hmm.
You can make it work.
Maybe get a Rashee Rice in there for more game stackiness. You can make it work. So try to. I think dig into the second tier games, try to find those lower salaried stacks. So we both agree that Bengals Cardinals could be there with a Joe Mixon, Marquise Brown redacted kind of situation. I think that the Texans are kind of fun there too. So dig into those, identify good games that you could potentially stack with lower salaries, and go from there. That is all that we have here for today on the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. We'll be back with you once again Monday to recap all the key takeaways, injuries, usages, et cetera, and take a look forward to week number 6. To get that as it is posted, make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find the NFL shows on the FanDuel YouTube page and on FanDuel TV+. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, potentially inspiring trends, where can they find you there?
On Twitter at Gdula13, GDULA13.
And I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow FanDuel Research at FanDuel Research. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your lineups across week 5. We'll talk to you once again Monday to wrap it all up. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.